A routine deep-sea dive turned into an unimaginable nightmare, revealing a fatal flaw that would lead to one of the most horrific accidents in industrial history. Violently decompressed in an instant, 6 men aboard the Byford Dolphin oil rig were thrust into history's most gruesome diving accident. What began as a routine saturation dive ended in absolute horror, with only one survivor, and even he would not escape without severe injuries. On Saturday, November 5th, 1983, deep within the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, the Byford Dolphin oil rig was drilling in the vast Frigg gas field. That day, divers Roy P. Lucas, Edwin Coward, Truls Hellevik, and Bjørn Giæver Bergersen were tasked with critical maintenance far beneath the rig. On the surface, 2 brave dive tenders, William Crammond and Martin Saunders, assisted them. Truls Hellevik and Bjørn Bergersen had descended to a depth of 90 meters to perform maintenance on the rig's drilling infrastructure. Reaching such extreme depths was only possible through a specialized diving bell, which connected to a series of chambers where the divers lived temporarily. Unlike conventional divers, these saturation divers would spend up to 28 days in these cramped, high-pressure living quarters, working, eating, and sleeping in an artificial environment. Life on the Byford Dolphin was demanding. The oil company expected divers to endure grueling 8-hour shifts, often with barely 3 hours of sleep before being sent back to work. While the pay was exceptionally good, averaging between $30,000 and $45,000 a month, the work environment was undeniably claustrophobic and incredibly challenging. The entire oil rig relied on hundreds of crew members working tirelessly in unison, yet none could have foreseen the impending catastrophe. What was a routine procedure for these 4 divers was about to transform into an unimaginable nightmare. The complex system of pressurized living chambers consisted of Chamber 1, Chamber 2, and an escape capsule mounted on a lifeboat. These chambers were connected to a trunk, a short tunnel, which in turn connected to the diving bell. William Crammond and Martin Saunders, the dive tenders, operated the system from the rig's exterior, clamping the diving bell onto this trunk. The living chambers remained stationary on the rig, while the diving bell could detach and descend to the required depths. This sophisticated setup was designed to optimize time and resources, ensuring a seamless transition between the high-pressure underwater environment and the divers' pressurized living quarters. Beneath the ocean's surface, pressure becomes a diver's most formidable adversary. Ambient pressure escalates by approximately 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of water depth. Each additional atmosphere exerts a crushing force on the body, equivalent to 6 pounds per square inch. This immense pressure presents inherent limitations for saturation divers. The primary challenge in deep-sea diving isn't the descent, but rather the return from those extreme depths. When submerged deeply, the escalating water pressure causes inert gases like nitrogen and helium to dissolve into the bloodstream, saturating it proportionally to the pressure increase. This saturation happens because divers breathe a specialized gas mixture within their chambers, typically heliox, a blend of helium and oxygen, which is carefully adjusted according to the dive's depth. This process is precisely why it's called saturation diving. Should divers resurface too rapidly, the sudden pressure drop triggers decompression sickness, commonly known as the bends. This perilous condition causes the dissolved nitrogen in the bloodstream to revert to a gaseous state, forming painful and dangerous bubbles throughout the body. The bends can manifest as nausea, dizziness, excruciating joint pain, paralysis, and can even prove fatal. The sole method to prevent decompression sickness is a slow, controlled ascent to the surface, allowing ample time for the dissolved gases to diffuse naturally and safely from the bloodstream. Unfortunately, The oil industry is not typically renowned for its patience when it comes to operational delays. On this particular day, as on any other, life support technicians meticulously ensured the air composition within the hyperbaric chambers precisely matched the specialized blend the divers required for their underwater work. Simultaneously, the dive control team managed the diving bell, raising and lowering it with a crane while closely monitoring the diver's every activity. At 4 a.m., Truls Hellevik and Bjørn Bergersen had finished their maintenance work. They had been operating at a pressure of 9 atmospheres, equivalent to a depth of 90 meters. Ascending in the diving bell, they reached the surface where the bell needed to be reattached to the diving chambers, both systems requiring identical atmospheric pressure for a safe transfer. Meanwhile, on the surface, Roy Lucas and Edwin Coward were resting, prepared to take over the next shift once Truls and Bjørn had returned and been transferred. In saturation diving, the tenders play an absolutely crucial role. They are responsible for deploying and retrieving the umbilical, the physical lifeline that connects the divers to the surface, providing their air supply, power, and communication. Historically, tenders were also entrusted with the critical task of docking the diving bell to the pressurized living chambers, a responsibility they held on the Byford Dolphin. Essentially, the tenders held the lives of their diving comrades in their hands. Compounding this immense responsibility, William Crammond and Martin Saunders had already been working for over 12 hours. Crammond successfully docked the diving bell to the living chambers, and Bjørn Bergersen and Truls Hellevik were safely transferred into Chamber 1. This team had performed the procedure countless times, knowing each step by heart. Under normal circumstances, transferring divers into their resting quarters and then detaching the diving bell was a straightforward 5-step process. First, the diving bell door, open to the trunk, would be closed. Second, the pressure inside the bell would be slightly increased to ensure the door sealed tightly. Third, the Chamber 1 door, also open to the trunk, would be closed. Fourth, the trunk itself would be slowly depressurized until it reached 1 atmosphere. Only then, as the 5th and final step, would the clamp be opened to separate the diving bell from the chamber system. But suddenly, a catastrophic error occurred. Crammond opened the clamp, initiating a violent chain reaction. The diving bell disconnected times before times the chamber doors were fully sealed, unleashing an explosive depressurization. The immense pressure differential ripped through the living chambers, instantly yanking Hellevik off his feet as the uncontrolled force rampaged across the deck. The air pressure inside the bell instantly plummeted from 9 atmospheres. The pressure experienced 90 meters below the surface to just 1 atmosphere, the standard air pressure at the surface. The explosive rush of air from the chamber propelled the massive diving bell with incredible force. It struck both Crammond and Saunders, critically wounding them. The precise cause remained unclear. Either Crammond disconnected the diving bell without explicit orders, or the diving leader mistakenly ordered the coupling lock removed while the tunnel remained pressurized. Crammond tragically succumbed to his injuries. Martin Saunders, though he survived, was found partially pinned under the 3.6 metric ton diving bell. His lungs had collapsed, and he sustained 3 fractures in his back and a broken neck. Yet, the fate of the 4 divers trapped inside the chambers was far more horrific. While the exact sensation is impossible to confirm, the sheer speed of the violent, unplanned decompression likely rendered their deaths instantaneous and, mercifully, painless. Such an extreme and rapid decompression is an absolute death sentence. Survival is impossible. Unlike the recent OceanGate disaster, where the remains were lost to the sea, the bodies of the Byford Dolphin divers were recovered. However, knowing the precise, gruesome details of what happened to these unfortunate souls offers little comfort, as official reports contain graphic descriptions of the horrific injuries their bodies sustained. The divers likely never comprehended what was happening, nor did they feel the agonizing effects of their terrible deaths. Despite their proximity to the door, the blood of Lucas, Coward, and Bergerson instantly boiled within their bodies as the enormous amounts of dissolved nitrogen rapidly reverted to its gaseous state. They died immediately. Following this violent nitrogen expansion, fat accumulated and solidified in their arteries, veins, hearts, and livers. The explosive force from the gas expansion literally scattered their blood and fragmented their bodies throughout the interior of the chamber. While Lucas, Bergerson, and Coward were rendered unrecognizable by the incident, Truls Hellevik suffered the most horrific fate. Being closest to the connecting door, the sudden pressure equalization caused the chamber 1 door to partially jam. This created a small, crescent-shaped opening, approximately 60 centimeters wide, through which Hellevik's body was violently forced by a tremendous pressure of 22.7 metric tons. Unable to fit through, the sheer force resulted in the horrifying outcome of his internal organs rupturing and being expelled from his body through that narrow gap. During the subsequent examination, investigators found Hellevik's spinal column, a section of his windpipe, and parts of his small intestine still inside the bell. His remaining internal organs, ejected from his body, appeared remarkably intact, almost as if they had been expertly harvested or dissected. In total, the incident claimed 5 lives. Despite the horrific, shredded state of the divers' bodies, the sheer brutality and instantaneous nature of the decompression left surprisingly little blood behind. Initially, blame was swiftly cast upon the crew, citing potential miscommunication or poor operational routines as the causes of the accident. Given that the crew frequently worked shifts exceeding 12 hours, human error seemed plausible. However, no one could definitively pinpoint the exact factors that led to the incorrect unlatching of the system and the subsequent horrific deaths. With William Kremen having died, the true reason for his action of opening the clamp was forever lost. To minimize the considerable risks inherent in saturation diving, flawless execution of every operational detail, especially during pressure-driven transfers, is paramount to avoid such catastrophic outcomes. However, the North Sea Divers Alliance, an activist group comprising active divers and relatives of the victims, strongly argued that negligent management had provided the Byford Dolphin divers with faulty equipment. They asserted that the pressure chamber system was obsolete and lacked the essential fail-safes that could have prevented the disaster. It is crucial to note that the equipment used by the crew during the operation dated back to 1975 and lacked modern fail-safe features. A critical missing component was an interlocking mechanism, which would have physically prevented Kremen from opening the trunk while the diving bell was still under pressure. In response to this tragedy, Norwegian regulations were subsequently revised to mandate interlocking mechanisms for all bell systems. Even with these revisions, many still believed the locking mechanism was the sole cause of the accident. But decades later, the full story began to emerge, revealing a deeper truth. Regrettably, it took decades for the Norwegian government, which held oversight of the Byford Dolphin in 1983, to finally acknowledge its responsibility for the incident and provide compensation to the families of the deceased men. It was not until 2009 that the government offered undisclosed settlements to the families of all 6 victims, including Martin Saunders. The official report ultimately concluded that faulty equipment, rather than solely human error, was the primary cause of the accident. Furthermore, a noisy environment that interfered with communications and unclear orders were cited as significant contributing factors. The Byford Dolphin rig itself remained a prominent fixture in offshore drilling for over 4 decades, operating in various locations across the globe. Finally, in 2016, the Byford Dolphin rig was decommissioned, bringing an end to the eventful and tragic saga of its storied career in the oil and gas industry.